Hi, guys, and welcome to the Quinn podcast. Here we give you a look through the eyes of the most successful athletes, entertainers, entrepreneurs, and influencers on this planet. Be sure to check out all of the content at quinnpodcast.com. Enjoy the episode. Real quick for the audience, give me a quick rundown of the career so far.
Oh, well, currently I'm a medical doctor. I practice in Australia. I was working as a neurosurgical registrar. That was my main focus, was to become a neurosurgeon. I came into this space and diet and nutrition and using that as intervention for my patients a number of years ago, and I found that it was so successful that I had to incorporate it in my practice. And so I had a side practice with a friend of mine. He actually had an established 40-year career using diet, lifestyle, these sorts of interventions to help facilitate health optimization, as opposed to just dealing with the crash damage of people being sick and debilitated. He tried to get people healthy and optimize their health so that they didn't have these problems in the first place. So that really resonated with me. And so on my days off or times that I could, I would go and help out there and see patients there. And then when he sort of had to retire, it was a sudden thing. And so, he was going to have to close down the practice. And so I decided to step in and take care of the patient. So I'm doing that full time now. Prior to that, I was playing, rugby at a competitive international level, and for a number of years, and then went to medical school after that. So my medical career, I graduated medical school in 2013 from the Royal College of Surgeons, and practiced in Europe for a couple of years. Took some time off, did some humanitarian work in Bangladesh, and then came to Australia. And I've been to Australia for the last 6 years now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Fast forward, like the nutrition part, you found that nutrition, carnivore, that was the one thing that moved the needle forward for you. It was the one thing that helped people the most.
From a diet perspective, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you have to look at this from a biological point of view. What is our species designed to eat? Food is species specific. It comes down to very specific inputs and outputs, and some of these things are going to be very harmful. Different plants have various defense chemicals. We've classified, categorized, and quantified about 1 million different defensive chemicals that plants make. And so this is hard science, and people saying that no, plants are all good for you, we're in the Garden of Eden, it really doesn't make sense, and it doesn't stand up to the available facts and evidence. So they can say that all they want, but the evidence is totally against them. So just understanding we get everything we need from meat, and that other things may cause harm to a greater or lesser extent, depending on how much you eat and what it is, etc. And so just being very careful with it and excluding those potential harms has seen a massive, massive improvement in people's lives. I think that a lot of it comes down to getting back to our biological past. If you say, well, where are the studies? We have hundreds of thousands of years of randomized controlled trials called nature, where humans have been living as apex predators and thriving in ice ages in the Arctic Circle. You can't do that with any other diet. You have to be a carnivore in those circumstances. There's nothing else to eat. And if you can't thrive in those circumstances, which are very harsh circumstances, we're talking -40, -50 degrees or worse every single day, and not seeing the sun for 9, 10 months a year, things like that, and having just really, really, really extreme conditions, you're not just barely making it through something like that, not for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. You either succeed greatly and thrive, or you go extinct, you die. And we didn't do that. We not only thrived, we became the most dominant species that's ever existed as carnivores, just eating meat. And so, that's important. That's a very important piece of information. We have other early humans millions of years ago who ate more plants than Homo habilis. Homo habilis went full apex predator carnivore, and they were the ones that survived. The other early humans, proto-humans that were more plant-based, they all died out. So that's the randomized controlled trial of nature and life, that only the strong survive, only the best make it, and we're descended from those people. So that's the principle, but it also comes back to, getting outside. We're not troglodytes. We're not chuds supposed to be like living underground and never seeing the sunlight. The sun's very important. You need to get outside. You need to be active. You need to move your body, and certain physical exercises. I mean, you don't have to go and do a fitness competition, but you should try to stay active. This stimulates your muscles. It stimulates various hormones. It grows your telomeres, which is the little caps on the end of your chromosomes that we think is pretty largely strongly indicative of how long we're going to live. So exercising and pushing yourself can actually lengthen your telomeres and potentially make you live longer. And so, getting these natural impulses, getting the natural food, the natural sunlight, the natural environment as much as we can in this very unnatural world, I've seen that help people more than anything I was ever taught in medical school. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, sounds solid. For me, it's like past 3 months, 4 months, something like that. I had Sean Baker on, I had a couple other guys on in carnivore space. So I'm dipping my toe in the water, right? What did that journey look like for you? When did you decide to go all in on this?
Well, I decided to do this not because I wasn't doing carnivore at the time. I took a class in cancer biology 24 years ago. And the professor started talking about all the plant toxins. I'd already taken botany and biology. I knew that in principle plants had toxins, but no one ever related that to the foods that we ate. And he did. And he said, no, these toxins absolutely exist in spinach and every other produce item. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, everything. And this was a cancer biology class where we were talking about the things that could be carcinogenic. And so he was talking about all the different carcinogens that were found in just normal produce items, like Brussels sprouts had 136 known carcinogens in them. Mushrooms had over 100, but spinach and kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, all these things had 60, 80, or over 100 known carcinogens. And so we were very taken aback by that. And he was serious. We realized he was serious. Everyone thought he was joking. We were sort of looking around to see if somebody else was in on the joke and like laughing in the corner or something like that. Nobody was. Everybody was as shocked and surprised as I was. And I remember thinking in my head, I said, well, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? Even though I've always hated them. And that should tell you something too. I mean, no animal is going to hate the taste of something that's good for them, or they won't eat it. No, deer don't have health coaches telling them to eat something that tastes like rubbish to them. And so he just sort of gave us a funny look and he said, yeah, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. And I said, yep, okay. That's enough. And I just stopped eating plants. And so, I went to the grocery store, and just everything had plants in it. Everything was made from or with plants. And that was my only litmus test. So I was like, if it has a plant, I'm not eating it. And but I was very confused. I didn't know what the hell I was going to eat. And I just came across some eggs, and I said, okay, eggs don't come from plants, so I'll get some eggs. And meat doesn't come from plants, so I'll eat some meat. So that's what I ate. And I continued that for a number of years, probably about 5 years. And it felt amazing. I mean, I never felt better physically or athletically, certainly. I mean, I just, that really changed everything. I was already an All-American rugby player. I was already, playing Premiership level in the US and Canada, and this just took my performance off to just the stratosphere. It was just night and day. And then when I was playing in England, and when I was 25, I sort of slipped off of it because some of the meat that was available, some of it was just for convenience. I was thinking about getting some breaded chicken. It just had some crumbs on it. So I was thinking, well, dose makes the poison. Maybe it's not all that bad. Same thing that people are saying now. And yeah, dose does make the poison. Dose is really small, really damn small. And actually, some things dose doesn't make the poison. Actually, smaller doses of glyphosate, for instance, have a increased endocrine disrupting capacity. So the less exposed you are to glyphosate, the worse the hormonal disruption is. So no, dose does not always make the poison. It could be, and there's some things like cyanide, lead, arsenic, these sorts of things, or certainly cyanide and lead. There's no safe dose of that. There's no okay acceptable dose of lead at all. Same with cyanide. It is only harmful at any level. And plants contain a lot of these things. It's over 3,000 plants that use cyanide to protect themselves, and again, about 1 million more. So I included just this little crumbed chicken, and within a couple of weeks, I remember thinking, why don't I feel as superhuman amazing as I normally do? Am I not pushing myself? Am I not working as hard? Am I 25 now and I'm just over the hill? Am I dying? And life is just getting worse from here on out. I didn't know what it was, but at 25, I felt like a superhero. And at 25 and a half, I did not. And so I didn't know what was going on with that. So I went on with my life, and sort of once one thing sort of slipped in, other things started slipping in, and I went back to a very clean, omnivorous, heavily meat-based diet. I always ate 80% meat anyway, and I'd have like a side salad or something like that because you're supposed to eat a stupid salad, and so I did that. And I never felt as good. I never felt as good as I did during those first 5 years of my 20s, and you just chalk it up to age, and I didn't really know until I was 38, and I came across actually Dr. Sean Baker's interview on Joe Rogan, and my brother was pretty blown away by it. And he said, "Hey, there's this doctor. He also played professional rugby, and he's saying you can get all your nutrition just from eating meat." And instantly, just because you've been indoctrinated for so long, from birth, really, that oh no, that can't possibly be. But then some piece of semblance of sense in the back of my head just said, "Oh, hold on a second. I basically did that for 5 years in my early 20s because I just didn't eat plants." And that was the time I've never felt better in my entire life. And so I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll give it a shot and I'll watch it and see what I think. Within 5 minutes, I knew that he was more right than he knew because, I knew a lot of information that I had been keeping track of in the literature that had been developing in the past couple of years. At that point, this was 2018, that really augmented his argument. I knew about the plant toxins, and no one else was talking about that at that time. Cholesterol, that had been shown to be a complete fraud just in the last few years before that. And sugar, fructose, that had been roundly shown to be a major contributor to disease and certainly metabolic syndrome, diabetes, things like that. And so that just made sense. And I said, well, humans actually are carnivores. I learned that when I was in second grade. We've been apex predators for millions of years. All of our ancestors ate like this. People are still eating like this in native populations, and they don't get these chronic diseases that we get. And that's what I was doing. Biologically, we're carnivores, and that's how I was eating. And that was it. I couldn't figure out what was making me feel so good back then, and that clicked for me. So I said, okay, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things, and I just cut it out. I was eating a very clean diet. I've never eaten a processed food junk. We've never eaten that. My mom cooked every single meal I ever had in her house. I've never ever had a junk food diet. We did not have packets of crap in our house. My mom cooked it from scratch. You might get the odd bag of chips or something like that, but the cereal we had was freaking shredded wheat. It was the most disgusting stuff ever, and Cheerios were like a treat. And so we never had a junk food diet. So at the time, I was just eating lean meat and not that much of it. I was limiting the amount of meat that I was eating. So I was trying to slim down. I'll just get back from Bangladesh, where I was doing humanitarian work with the Rohingya refugees there, and I was trying to slim down and get back into rugby, and so I could go back and play rugby because I wanted to play. And I was just eating vegetables like spinach, kale, and broccoli. Those were supposed to be the best ones. So I was just having veggies and just lean meat, and I did not feel good. I figured I was, I'm basically middle-aged at that point, 38, and didn't feel good, didn't have a lot of energy, always had an upset stomach, bloating, all that sort of stuff. I couldn't even cross my arms across my middle like that because the pressure actually was so uncomfortable. And within a couple of weeks, I felt so much better that I decided that, yeah, I'm back playing rugby again. I probably quintupled my calories because I started eating a lot more fatty meat and I just cut out the vegetables. I was already not eating carbohydrates. I never drank during the rugby season. So there'd be years at a time I wouldn't drink alcohol. And just cutting the vegetables, it's pretty controlled. I cut the vegetables and added more fat to my meat. That was it. It was 2 changes. Massively improved my health. And I lost weight. I lost about 23 pounds in the first 2 weeks. And a lot of that's going to be water weight. You're dumping inflammation. Water's going to go with it. And so I didn't have these fluctuations where my weight's going up and down every day. It all came off and then just stabilized. And then I started shredding fat and stacking on muscle, and I felt so much better. I felt like I was 22 again. I felt better at 38 than I did at 28 playing professional rugby and in the Super League and things like that, um, in California. And so, I really started thinking about this and saying, okay, there's we've got to see what we know, what can we prove, what do we understand. And that's when I started just digging through the literature because I was had some time off because of the humanitarian work and things like that. I had 10 hours a day to dedicate to just reading studies and just looking things up and trying to find out what we knew and what we could prove and asking questions and looking for answers in the literature. And well, if this is true, then we should see something like this. And there's a saying that if you have 2 competing theories, you should be able to find evidence with which to test them against. And so that's what I did. And I asked questions and tested them against the literature and what we already knew and of everything else. And so it made a massive, massive difference for me and my family. And then I started looking at this from a medical perspective. Like, we're carnivores as a species, this type of animal we are, and we're not eating that way. It's like if a bunch of lions started eating quinoa, like, they're not going to be healthy. They're going to have health problems. And we having dogs and cats, domesticated pets, zoo animals that are fed the wrong diet, they get diabetes and lupus and cancer and these sorts of things. Say don't feed ducks bread because, like, they'll get diabetes, right? So there's signs at parks saying you should not feed the animal because they'll get sick. They have those same signs at the zoo. We need to put those signs on our fridge as well.
That's that's solid. Have you found out what it was between age 25 and 38 that specifically impacted your cognition? Like, why you felt better after quitting whatever it was you were eating except meat?
Well, my brain fog went away. I mean, I didn't even realize that it was there until it was gone. I did notice at one point in my life I had really bad brain fog when I was 28, um, and studying for the MCATs and things like that because I'd taken a lot of time off after my undergraduate degree before going to medical school. So I was doing my MCATs then, and I remember I was studying, and I was studying for hours and hours and hours a day, like 13 hours a day sometimes, and I'd wake up bright, fresh, bushy-tailed and things like that. And I'd be going, and everything was great, great, great. And then, like, halfway through the day, I just get so drowsy, and like my brain would be foggy. But I was like, "What the hell is going on?" I didn't know if it was like allergies, or I figured I chalked it up to allergies. I just thought maybe it's just allergies making me feel a bit off. And I remember being very confused because I feel so tired, but I had a really good night's sleep. I felt great when I woke up. What's going on? Why do I feel like garbage now? And I'd have to, like, take a nap in the middle of the afternoon, and just my brain, like, didn't work. And thinking back, what I was eating then, just out of pure convenience and ease, everyone's saying, "Oh, you want whole grain, this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah." So I bought a whole bunch of whole grain pasta packets, and it was just, like, super easy just to, like, boil up a big pot of pasta, throw some sauce on it out of a jar, and just eat that quickly. and get on with studying because I was just so focused on studying. And just looking back, I mean, that was it. I felt great up until I had that meal. And I feel okay for a bit when you're getting this carb rush, and then you get this drop. You get you get hypoglycemic. It's called reactive hypoglycemia when your insulin goes up and it crashes your carbs, and just all the wheat, whole wheat, all these other sorts of things. They absolutely are bad for you. There's a number of books on the subject. I mean, there's like Wheat Belly. There's what Grain Brain, all these other sorts of things, and they
Hmm.
talk about how they affect your body, how they affect your physiology, how they affect your brain. I definitely noticed that, and so that all went away. My Yeah, I didn't have brain fog, a lot of mental clarity, much better sleep, slept a lot better. And when I woke up, even if I was tired, like if I was on call or something like that, like when I was working in neurosurgery, I could be on call for minimum was 36 hours straight that I was working, because you would work 12 to 14 hours and then you'd be on call overnight. It was crazy busy. You were always slammed. I mean, there may be 2 times that I actually got to sleep through the night. And maybe got 1 or 2 calls to interrupt, but nothing urgent. And the other times, I mean, you're just getting calls every 5 to 10 minutes, 24/7, all throughout, all over the night, everything like that. It's just like you will not get sleep, and you're just constantly answering this damn phone. And and then you're back to work for another, 12, 14, 16 hours the next day. Right. So that was a minimum 36 hours or so. And then you might work the whole weekend, maybe like 48 hours all weekend, and then you'd have to work 14, 15 hours on Monday. Right. You might be doing 60 hours, 65 hours straight. And you may not be getting sleep. And so, obviously you do better with sleep, and I did better with sleep. But when I didn't have sleep, I could cope with it much better. For on calls, or especially my intern year, and that was very hectic. It was very different. You're not getting sleep, and you're up all night and working, and you're doing this day after day after day. It really wore on me, and it was that year was just like the longest year of my life, my intern year, when I was not carnivore. And now I'm doing even more hours, more on calls. It's more intense, but it's fine. I can deal with it. So I like sleep, but if I don't get sleep, I can still function at a high level, and it doesn't burn me out, and it doesn't have a significant drop in my performance where it's going to affect my work, which is very important.
You still play rugby, football?
No, I haven't in several years.
Mm.
One, because just the time schedule is not really conducive to anything outside of the hospital with
Right.
that. But I kickboxed since I was a kid, and we did a lot of knee strikes and things like that. No one told me at the time, but this really screws up the cartilage on your kneecaps. And so I damaged the cartilage in my kneecaps when I was, since I was 14, I was doing this. And so I had damage on that I noticed as a teenager and in my 20s and things like that. It just sort of slowly got worse and worse and worse. And now it's just bone on bone, because once that process starts, it's really a one way process. And so, and that just causes pain. Who cares? I don't care about pain. That's not a problem. But the problem is it sort of it does something. It flakes off little pieces of cartilage that get stuck in the rest of the joint, and it causes effusions. So when I try to run or play rugby, my knee will swell up. It's like I feel fine doing it. I feel great actually, but then I'll just get this big swollen knee. So I haven't quite figured out how to stop that from
Mm.
happening. But trying different sorts of things. Once I get that figured out, I will be going back to play rugby, though. That's for sure.
Yeah. No. The reason I ask is I'm on a cycle or running about 2 hours a day, give or take.
Mhm.
I eat approximately 5,000 calories. How would you do that on a meat-based diet? Because that's something sort of tough.
No, it's easier. I mean, think about it. Fat has more calories per gram than anything else, and so you're going to get a lot more calories. You're going to get a lot more energy with far less food by eating fat.
Hmm.
And so, getting fat and meat, fat and lean is going to give you every single thing you need for your body and your brain, and it will give you a better energy supply as well. But it's more about nutrients than it is energy, calories. Because calories, that's just not how your body uses energy anyway. It's just a very outdated way of thinking about it. There is energy there, and that does have an effect, but it's not caloric energy. We're not burning it. We're not combustion engines and steam locomotives where we're burning something and like wood, and that's heating up a boiler and making steam energy. That's when calories matter, is when you have that sort of system. But with us, that's not how our bodies use energy. And so your body tracks nutrients, it doesn't track calories. So you need these different proteins. It's not just enough to get the names of the proteins that you can from plants. It's the quality of proteins, it's how many you have, it's proportionality, because every molecule that your DNA codes for is a protein. It's a string of amino acids, and very specific amino acids. And if you don't have, if you can have all the other amino acids, and if you just have 50% of what you need of lysine or something like that, those proteins all stop. You're making, you know, these, chains of amino acids, and all of a sudden you get to lysine, it just stops. It just stops. It just sits there. You can't make that. You can't make that protein anymore. And all the proteins stop right at that lysine. And so you need to get more of those in. So it's not enough to just get enough things in your diet, or the right proteins that have a complete protein. They have to be in the right proportion. And so meat, eggs, things like that, they're called perfect protein because they have not only all of the amino acids that we need, but we have them in the proper proportions for what we need, because they are the food that we're supposed to eat. And that's one of the ways you can tell. Also, another way you can tell is bioavailability. The protein in plants has nowhere near the bioavailability of that of meat. And same with the nutrients. Your plants try to trap their nutrients in ways that animals can't access because they don't want to benefit the animal that eats it, right? And so, that doesn't work in nature. If you're benefiting things that kill you, you're going to go extinct. That's it. And most life has gone extinct, in fact. So the ones that have survived are these battle-hardened survivors that sort of won the game of life, and they have very strong defenses. One of those defenses is by making themselves less beneficial and less nutritious. And that's another way you can tell that we're not designed to eat these plants, because we don't have the enzymes and ability to break down and extract these nutrients to a large degree. And some don't, we don't at all. We have to cook them, ferment them, soak them in lye or ash or clay, or all these other sort of traditional ways of preparing food to lower the toxic load and increase the bioavailability of these nutrients. If we were biologically adapted to eating these things, and we were designed to eat them, and they were our optimal food, we would have the enzymes and ability to do that. We would not have to cook them. You can eat raw meat for the rest of your life, and many people do. The Inuit do that all the time. And you don't need to do anything special to meat to draw out the bioavailability. And in fact, some people say you lose a lot of nutrients that you want, like taurine and glutamine, by cooking and denaturing the meat. So it's just very clear that that's there's just some of the evidence to show that that's not what we're supposed to eat. But
So what do you eat?
well, I was just going to just lastly, I was just going to say, so as an athlete, you're going to get all the nutrients you need in the proportion that you need them, which is vital as an athlete. And it's vital for everybody, but really as an athlete, because you're running at a higher level, you need everything clicking in place, and you're going to get more energy for eating less. I mean, think about it this way: you get 9 calories per 1 gram of fat, right? So that's 1 gram per 9 calories, but carbs, it's 2.2 grams per 9 calories. And protein actually takes a bit of energy to break it down to use as energy, because we're not supposed to use proteins for energy. We're supposed to use proteins, amino acid, for our building blocks in our body, and making all the molecules that our DNA codes for. So it actually is about 3 grams of protein per 9 calories, kilocalories, food calories. Right. So you will just have to bring in less grams of fat in order to get the same number of calories, which can keep your weight down because grams are what weigh something. Calories don't weigh anything. Again, that's heat energy. That's like saying how many calories, how much does 2,000 calories weigh is like saying how much does 60 miles an hour weigh? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Those are wrong units, right?
Hmm.
And um, so that's the thing. So you're getting everything you need in the proportion that you need it. You're getting all the energy you need. And in fact, it's much more dense energy. So if you're talking about I need to eat enough, you need much less fat and fatty meat to get the same amount of calories and energy. It's much better energy than you do anywhere else. So yeah, as an athlete, it's even better to do it this way. And you just eat until fatty meat stops tasting good. And you try to do that after your workout because if you do it before, you're going to dedicate a lot of blood to your digestive tract to digest it, and you need that for your muscles and things like that. So you want to try to eat after you work out, or give it like a good 5 hours before a workout or something like that. But then if you're eating enough, you're just going to stack on muscle and have great performance.
Eating enough though. So that
Hmm
5,000 calories, like that I'm eating right now, based on
hmm
what is it, pasta, rice, whatever. How would
hmm
you transition to the carnivore?
Yeah, you just eat very fatty meat. Get 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. That's around 65% lean ground beef with 35% fat is 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. Egg yolks are 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. Those are perfect protein. They have everything you need in the proportion that you need them, as far as proteins and other nutrients. And so I would just, yeah, it depends. Like how many times a day are you working out?
Twice.
Twice. Okay. So what times?
Like, is it 8 in the morning, 5 in the evening, something like that?
Yeah. So you eat as much as you can after your first workout,
Mm-hmm.
and then you give yourself a large space of time to digest and incorporate that, and then you work out again on a now empty stomach again, and then you eat again, and you eat as many times that night as your body needs to. You'll find that you'll be able to incorporate enough nutrition, and you'll feel better doing it. And if you're losing weight, you're getting more lean than you want to, it means that you're not eating enough. You just have to pick up the amount that you're eating, and you just have to find times to sort of fit in meals and things like that between workouts, and you will. I mean, it's a bit of a balance for some athletes early on, especially when they're competing at a high level. They're like, oh, hey, I'm losing too much weight. But if you're able to find these little areas to just add in a couple beef patties here, dozen eggs there, and all these sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things, you'll find that you actually start putting on a lot of muscle. In fact, sometimes you put on more than you want, like which is a good problem to have. My friend Ryan Talbot, who's a three-time All-American collegiate decathlete, won the bronze in the Pan Am Games for America for the decathlon. Just missed out on the Olympics this year. He went carnivore mid-season, and in his second decathlon ever, won the Big Ten NCAA Big Ten championship for the decathlon D1, and set a school record for Michigan State, and then was an All-American. And his performance just went up and up and up. And so he found that he was sort of, because he was just training so much, he started losing weight. So just the same thing. It's only is you need to fit in meals in these different areas. So he would eat after his morning workout, sort of he wouldn't snack, but he would just have big chunks when he could, and then eat again after his evening workout. And now he found that he was actually had to pull back on his training and his weightlifting because he was putting on too much muscle. And as a decathlete, you need to stay fairly light
Sure.
because you're going to be pole vaulting, high jumping, sprinting, all these other sorts of things. So he was putting on too much muscle and he's getting too bulky, right? So he went from one problem to the other, and so then he adjusting his workout schedule and exactly how much he eats, you could just stabilize your weight and get it where you want. So just a matter of getting those meals in. But it's much more calorically dense per gram. And so you don't have to eat as much. So you're going to be eating more grams. You're going to be eating literally double the grams in carbs and pasta and rice and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
than you would have to if you were eating those same number of calories in fat. So you're actually eating less and getting more.
So I'm trying to, is it as easy as dividing the weight of the food I'm eating right now by 2 then? Because I'm trying to figure out how much to actually eat in a day. Meat.
The great thing about this is that you don't have to figure that out. I know we want to because like we're so used to it, and especially as an athlete, you're like, well, you have to have things so tailored, but you really don't have to. Animals in the wild don't have a health coach to tell them how to get their macros right. I've never seen a koala pull out a calculator to figure out its macros, and you shouldn't have to either. If this is indeed our natural diet, again, that speaks to its intuitive nature, that you should just be able to do it intuitively, and that is exactly what we see. And so your body will tell you exactly what it needs for your demand. So the trick is to eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. And it's that taste response that you're looking for, because when you're hungry and your body wants those nutrients, fatty meat will taste very good. And every single bite that you have after that will taste slightly less good. The reason being is we have receptors in our stomach that track up our vagus nerve to our brain and can actually track the macros and micros in our stomach. And so long before we digest and absorb them, our body knows what's coming. And so we become satiated even though we haven't absorbed anything yet. And people think, well, that's because stretch receptors in your stomach. No, I mean, there are stretch receptors that release leptin. Leptin is one small part of the story, and you actually secrete more leptin from your adipose tissue, your fat tissue, than you do from your stomach. So that's not the only thing there. And we know this because like in the 80s, we said, well, just eat a whole bunch of fiber and plants that have no calories, and it'll stretch out your stomach. You'll feel full, you'll feel satisfied, and you'll be tricking your body because you're not actually eating anything. Why don't you just do it with styrofoam then? Just eat a block of styrofoam. It'll have the same effect. You're not getting any use from it, and it's just taking up space. And that didn't work. People were extremely hungry. They're very bloated. They had all these problems. And this is when the eating disorders started coming in. People, binging and purging and all that sort of stuff started around this time when we started making these really, really, really poor health recommendations, diet recommendations. So you just eat intuitively. You eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. Your body will signal your brain saying, this is how much we have. Your brain will do some calculations and say, okay, we need a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. And every bite will taste slightly less good until finally it doesn't taste good at all. And you will actually get to a point where a bite of meat actually tastes like cardboard. Why is that? 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, it tasted amazing. It was the best thing you had ever eaten. And now it doesn't taste very good. It's the same piece of meat cooked at the same time in the same conditions. It's still warm. So why doesn't it taste good anymore? It should be a 1-to-1. If that's just a chemical expression and our bodies are just this, this binary analog, then that should be what it is. But our bodies are extremely complicated and able to track nutrients, and that's how all animals in life in the wild know exactly how much to eat and how many nutrients to extract, or else they die. That's all there is to it. So there's you have tens of trillions of cells in your body, and they all have trillions of different chemical interactions going on inside of them every second. So there is no equation on Earth that will ever be complex enough to ever be able to figure out exactly what you need and how much of it you need and in what proportion, etc. But it's okay because you don't have to, because your body does that for you. Your body does all of those calculations for you. And so you just have to let it. And if you know what to look for, you eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, then you'll do fine. The problem comes when we eat these highly processed and sort of compulsive, addictive foods that are designed to be addictive and designed to make you want to eat more and eat more and eat more and give this positive taste response like a Cheeto or something like that. But then it goes into your stomach and there's no nutrients. Your body goes, no, not good enough. We still need all these nutrients. And you just keep eating these things and eating these things and eating these things, right? So there are things that can taste good because they're designed to taste good, or sugar, which is designed by nature to taste good and it be an addictive drug so that you move its seed that benefits the plant. It gives us a quick hit of energy, but It's not a long-term ideal solution, and certainly not in the refined forms that we're adding it to everything. You're getting very mixed up signals. But if you're just eating your natural food, your body should be able to tell you to stop, when to stop. So, you can track that and you can sort of see how much that ends up being. For me, it's about a kilo. If I'm sedentary and just relaxed, I eat, for my size, about 2 pounds of beef a day. And if I'm working out and training more, that could easily double. It just depends on what your specific nutritional and energy demands are. If you have excess weight, people find that they don't need to eat as much. The body prioritizes their body fat, and they start losing that, as well as getting in these, because you still need nutrients. Fat is an essential nutrient. There's essential fatty acids you have to have, or you can get sick and die. There's essential fat soluble nutrients that you have to have, or you get sick and die. So you can't just avoid fat just because you have fat on you. It's not just about energy. It's a nutrition thing, and so when people do have excess fat, though, they can use some of that energy, instead of having to bring it in, by mouth. And they'll often find that they're eating a certain amount. And then when they get to a point where they're at a stable low body fat percentage, your appetite can double. For me, it was literally overnight. I remember I was just like a specific size steak that I was having every single day, and that was perfect for me, like a big fatty ribeye. And then one day I had that steak at night and everything was fine. I woke up in the morning and said, I kind of want another steak. So I had another steak and then went about my business. And then that night I went, I kind of want my steak again. And now I was up to two. And now I was having two of those a day, and I was just stacking on muscle. But I was at a stable body fat percentage. Your body will tell you. And just remember that if you're losing more weight than you want to, eat more. Just find ways of eating more, fit those throughout the day. Typically, if you're putting on muscle, if you want to put on muscle, if you want to put on weight, or you're working out to a high degree, you'll usually people do best eating at least twice a day. That's typical. But just see what your body's telling you to do. And also remember, as an athlete, when you go ketogenic, you're switching metabolic systems, you're switching metabolic pathways, and it does take some time for your body to reacclimatize to using ketones. Your muscles actually prefer ketones. Everyone thinks that you need glucose and glycogen for your muscles. It's not true. Volek, Finney, and McSweeney, Professor Noakes, all these people have published massive studies, randomized controlled crossover trials in athletes where they go a carb group and a keto group. They have them, adapt for several weeks, and then they try, they have them compete, and they have no drop in their performance, and they switch the groups. The keto and carb groups switch, and they're keto adapted for Noakes trials 42 days, so that's 7 weeks, 6 weeks, and then trial it again and again, no drop in performance whatsoever. But then you have something like the Supernova trial where they just put people in ketogenic diets and just tested them at the end of the week or 2 weeks, and they had a drop in performance. Yeah, well, they weren't keto adapted. You have different sorts of genes that you turn on, so you can use ketones properly. Volek found in people that had already been on ketogenic diets, and these are world-class ultramarathon runners and Ironman runners, that and that was the other thing with the Supernova trial. The athletes, the world-class athletes that they used were speed walkers, and I'm like, do I really call them that an athlete? Like, I don't know. Like, they would consider that an athlete, but I don't know. I think jury's out on that one for me. But in any case, in the Volek trial, which is called the Faster trial in 2016, he looked at people that were already ketogenic as world-class athletes, and they'd been ketogenic for anywhere from 9 to 36 months, average of 20, 22 months on a ketogenic diet. And they found that they were not only outperforming the carb groups, but they were oxidizing fat for their muscles at over 90% VO2 max, meaning like 92% of their maximal effort of their body's full capacity, they were still burning fat and oxidizing fat. And if you're worried about glucose, we make glycogen. It's all that available, but your body was still just using fat. More interestingly, Volek did muscle biopsies of all these athletes in the carb group and the keto group. And before exercise, after a 3-hour run that they did, which is kind of rough because they did a muscle biopsy and then they ran 3 hours on on a treadmill, and they said that it felt like they were getting stabbed in the leg, with every single step. They're just like, God, for 3 hours, it's pretty cool that they signed up for that. Then they did another muscle biopsy after the 3 hours, after the 3-hour run, and then they let them rest for 3 hours and took another muscle biopsy. The carb group is sucking down sugar gels and packets and Gatorades this whole time because they need those carbs to keep fueling their exercise. Keto group just on their own body, right? And then they actually found that the muscle glycogen levels in both groups, keto and carb, with carbs sucking down a bunch of sugar, were exactly the same at all 3 points, right? So they had the same starting muscle glycogen levels, they had the same ending glycogen levels, and 3 hours after recovery, they were back up to the same levels again. And carb group taking in carbs, keto group not, just running on their own fat and replenishing it by their own fat stores. So, you're worried about glycogen, you don't be. But there is a period of adaptation. It can take a few weeks. Noakes found that people were pretty much back up to their old standard after about 3 weeks. And that's what I found personally. And with a lot of athletes that I work with, it's 2-3 weeks. You usually back up. And then after that, you start taking off after that. McSweeney in 2018, again with world-class Ironman and ultramarathon runners, they self-selected into keto and carb groups. Okay. So, and then they took those groups and let them keto adapt for 3 months. Okay. And at the end of just 3 months, and you get a lot of, if you're just ketogenic for 3 months, you'll have 4 times the number of mitochondria and they're 4 times as effective. And so that's going to be a huge bonus. And I see athletes all the time after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months that their testosterone levels double, sometimes more than double. And you can't tell me that that's not giving you an athletic advantage, as a male athlete. And your mitochondria are actually what code for your testosterone as well. They're very important in your hormones. And so then in the McSweeney trial, they looked at 3 different exercises. So they did, it was a big 100-mile run. They also did a 6-second sprint and then an explosive power test. So all the different kinds of ways you can use your muscle. And people say, well, it's good for long distance, but it's not good for explosive sports like rugby. And then other people say, well, it's good for explosive sports like rugby and weightlifting. Bah, you can't do the Tour de France with it or something like that. No, so this covered all of them. And in fact, there are, Chris Froome is a 4-time Tour de France winner, and he's ketogenic. He does ketogenic diets, right? Some of the top Ironman runners are ketogenic or even full carnivore. And so McSweeney found that the ketogenic group that had only been ketogenic for 3 months outperformed the carb group, and they're all elite world-class athletes. And they outperformed the carb athletes on all 3 exercises. The 100-mile run did not reach statistical significance, so that's just a trend. But they did all, the trend was that they did better. But the sprint and the explosive power test, that was conclusive. That was statistically significant that they beat all the carb athletes. So you have a huge advantage, and there's other advantages too. I mean, like if you have a 65-kilo athlete who is only 6% body fat, so like an elite level sort of competitor, that all of the glycogen that they can store in their muscles and their liver with maximal carb loading is only about 2,400 kilocalories of energy, food calories. But in just that 6% body fat in that 65-kilo individual, that 6% body fat has over 35,000 kilocalories of energy in it. So you're 15 times more energy as a ketogenic athlete, carnivore athlete, than you would be eating carbohydrates. So you have massive, massive, massive performance advantage because you don't just have to be sucking down these gels. It also is clearing up all different sorts of, gut issues, IBS. I mean, if you're on a cycle and you're competing, you're riding for 2 hours, the last thing you need is to have an upset stomach or some sort of pain, your back hurts, your knees are sore. Massively reduces inflammation. Just ketones directly suppress the NLRP3 inflammasomes. You have less inflammation in your body. You're bringing in less inflammatory foods as well. And so I see my patients, their CRP, their ESR, their other inflammatory markers, they just come down to just perfect ideal levels. And then you have to think about a longevity principle. I mean, you're not eating tons of sugar and carbs, which are metabolically disruptive. In all of those trials, these are world-class athletes that Noakes were looking at, Volek, Finney, McSweeney, they were all looking at the carbohydrate cohorts that, they could compete to a similar degree. But McSweeney's trial, the keto athletes were outperforming them. But the thing is that they were all metabolically sick. A lot of these guys were pre-diabetic or even fully diabetic as elite class, world class ultra marathoners and Ironman competitors. And so these guys are, they're just working out so much. And as people, if you believe certain people, they say that exercise is the most important thing. And yet you have these guys who are the fittest people in the world and they're diabetic. So no, you can't outrun a bad diet. And clean carbohydrates are a bad diet even still. So, that's a major issue. We're talking about, joints earlier and breakdown of cartilage. When we look at when we're doing scope, we're taking out damaged cartilage in different joints or even in discs, like degenerative discs in spines, they take those out. They've actually looked at them and found that they're actually just full of damage from sugar. Sugar does something called glycation, sugar, carbohydrates, any carbohydrates. There are sugars. Sugars are carbohydrates. And they physically fuse southern molecules called glycation. It permanently damages them and get these things called advanced glycation end products. And they build up in your body and they cause harm. This is what kills diabetics. This is what damages the vasculature, damages various organs, a multi-organ failure. You go blind, your kidneys fail, your toes rot off, you have to get your feet and legs amputated. You get Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, hormonal disruption, infertility, like all these different sorts of things, just because you have elevated blood sugar that we consider normal elevation. It's not normal. It's very abnormal and it's very damaging to the body, and it causes arthritis and degenerative spines and degenerative discs. So as an athlete, your joints obviously have to last. And so, if you're not eating carbohydrates, you're not getting prediabetes, you're not getting all these damage from high blood sugar, and you're going to preserve your joints a lot better as well. And there's so many other reasons. I mean, we're looking, NAD is something that people are looking at now, trying to get supplementation or NAD injections and infusions and things like that. Well, one of the best ways to preserve your NAD and make it last longer and use it better is by being ketogenic, because to make the exact same amount of ATP in your mitochondria, it takes 1/4 of the NAD to do that with ketones rather than glucose. Glucose requires 4 NAD plus molecules to break down glucose into 2 acetyl-CoA molecules, and that goes through the Krebs cycle and makes ATP. But with ketone, it only takes 1 NAD plus to make 2 acetyl-CoA molecules. So it's 1/4 of the demand. And so your body just works better, your brain works better. And as an athlete, every little fraction of a margin helps and counts. And this actually gives you huge margins.
Yeah, I hear you. Like the main argument, or like the lowest hanging fruit argument against just carnivore and in general. Why are we getting older if we're eating all this bullshit? Is it just because we're not dying at a young age, so the average is higher? How do you see that?
Oh, I mean, look, we know genetically that we're designed to live 120 years, so if people say like, oh, my grandma ate a whole bunch of plants and she lived to 90, it's like, well, then your grandma died 30 years early. I mean, there's all there is to it. Like these native populations, like Native Americans, Native Australians that were, indigenous and living on predominantly if not exclusively, carnivorous diet, especially in certain areas. Obviously, you're talking about two entire continents and a lot of different people in between. So things did vary, and especially with access. But to a large degree, plants were seen as medicinal and survival. They did this so that they could have something if they didn't get enough meat. And there were certainly areas that did get enough meat. In the Great Plains, the Cheyenne Indians and other nations, they did one big hunt a year. They did a buffalo drop. This big herd of buffalo would go over a cliff, and they would be able to have enough meat for the entire year for their all of their people. And as the herds moved through the middle of America, they just dropped off, a little bit here, a little bit there. And so they were self-reporting and living to be 110, 115, 120, sometimes up to 137 years old. It's a guy named Chief John Smith White Wolf, who is a chief of the Native American people. He died in the 1920s, and he had been saying for decades how old he was, and and his family were all corroborating and all these sorts of things. And then there's no hard evidence one way or the other. We don't have a birth certificate for him because there weren't any, but you'll have blog posts about why this is bullshit or true or whatever. But, the fact of the matter is that this guy had been saying this for decades about how old he was. We have records of that. And he has spoken on numerous occasions about his experiences fighting in the War of 1812, right? And even if you're just a young man or a boy fighting in the War of 1812, if you're 12 years old fighting in the War of 1812 and you die in the mid 1920s, you're old as shit. And so, it's not like, it's not, hard evidence of anything, but it fits with that 120-year genetic timeline that we should be seeing. And you go back to different populations, they all talk about how they're living to be, around 120 years old. You go to Herodotus. Herodotus is the father of historians, ancient Greek, and he chronicled a story between a meeting between the Persians and the Ethiopians. And the Persian diplomat was speaking to the Persian king or the Ethiopian king, and the Ethiopian king asked him, "Hey, what does your emperor eat? What do your people eat? And how long do they normally live?" And he explained growing wheat and making bread, and saying that their people normally lived around 70 years, pretty similar to now. And the Ethiopian king sort of laughed at him and said, "Well, no wonder you live such short lives if all you eat is dirt. We only eat boiled meat, and we only drink the milk from our cattle besides water, and our people would live 120 years, sometimes much longer." And so, you could be just bragging, could be just making things up, but that number shows up again and again and again in these indigenous populations. And people say, "Oh, no, they die in their 30s. No, they don't. You're talking about life expectancy from birth. And so, well, the cavemen, they ate a whole bunch of meat, but they all died in their 30s. Really? Was there a Census Bureau back 50,000 years ago in the last ice age? Really? How the hell do you know that then? You can't actually tell the age of a skeleton past maturity. So once it hits like 25, really 35 is the maximum, because you have the lambdoid suture is the last suture in your skull to fuse. And so if it's unfused, they're below 35. If it is fused, it's above 35. That's all you can tell. And so, yeah, well, it's 35 and up. It's at least 35, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have no idea how old these people were. And I said, well, we don't see all the degenerative changes and arthritis and this is that. They weren't getting it. So you're not going to have these degenerative changes that would normally, like in our populations, show like an old crippled adult. So people make a lot of assumptions, but we have recent data, hunter-gatherer data, and they're not even full carnivores, but there's a research group out of Arizona State University. They've been studying Amazonian tribes, and not even full carnivores, but they would live at least as long as Westerners and things like that. But they did not die of diabetes and cancer and heart disease and these sorts of things. They died from infections and injuries and things like that. And infant mortality rate is higher in these populations because they don't have pediatric hospitals and NICUs and things like that. But when you actually get to adulthood, you live much longer. And so that's the mistake people make. They think that, even in Europe and America, that the average life expectancy was in the 30s in the 1800s and before. Again, that's average life expectancy from birth. And in 1850, yes, indeed, it was 38 years old. But if you made it to 10 years old, on average, you make it to 60 years old. If you made it to 20 years old, it was even older than that. So if you made it to just a normal adult age, if you made it to 30 or 40, the likelihood is you'd make it to 70 or 80. And even in some areas, the average life expectancy for adults, if you made it to adulthood, there's a period of time in the late 1800s where in England, if you made it to adulthood, on average, you'd live longer than people in England do now. So, it's just a matter of how you screw around with statistics and things like that. But native populations that have long been studied and long had this attribution that they're longer lived. The Maasai, the average life expectancy for the Maasai is 60 years from birth. But when you get to adulthood, you may live much longer. And if you're having 2 or 3 kids are dying in infancy, and that's pulling down the average to 60, that means that a lot of people are living a lot older than 60 in order to bring that average down. So yeah, that's the thing. And you should live longer if you're eating this way. You absolutely should live longer eating this way. Slow poison is still poison. People who smoke don't die the next day. They don't die in 2 years. They live 20 years. It drops 10, 20 years off their life if they're a heavy smoker. They're still living a pretty long life, right? So, you might average, I don't know what the average life expectancy of a smoker is at the moment, but let's say it's 60 years, okay, and you might make it to 78 otherwise. Okay, that's a big drop off, but you're still living to 60, right? So you're not seeing all the damage in front of you until the very end. And the simple fact that people are dying 40, 50 years earlier than our genetic design means something is holding us back. Something is killing us. And most people are dying from non-communicable chronic diseases. 90% of the deaths in Western countries are from non-communicable chronic diseases. So diabetes, heart disease, cancer, COPD, mental health disorders, autoimmunity, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, these sorts of things. That's what they're dying from. 74% of people around the world are dying from these things. So these are degenerative processes that aren't in nature. Typically, we don't see elephants getting Alzheimer's and osteoporosis and just cracking a hip in the Serengeti and falling over and things like that. We just don't see that, right? This is unique to humans and our domesticated animals. That's it. So those domesticated animals will get all the same diseases that we get if and only if we're feeding them man-made food. And we're saying, well, no, it's a science diet, and this is scientifically shown to be exactly what dogs and cats need. Dogs and cats don't eat grains. You know why? Because grains did not exist in their world until they met humans. They never ate these things. And the grains that we're feeding them didn't even exist in nature. Let's not kid ourselves. So we're getting all the same diseases that dogs and cats are getting. But dogs and cats only get this if they're being fed this garbage. Science actually tells us that dogs and cats are obligate carnivores and need to eat meat. And they require meat, and even raw meat, especially for cats. That's what the science actually shows. The food companies say differently, but that's because like Mars and the other processed junk food sugar industry owns the pet food industry as well. Mars, like Mars bars that makes all the candy and things like that, they make the majority of pet food and all that processed kibble and things like that. So, and they have industry capture on the veterinary schools, just like the food and drug companies have capture on the educational systems in human for human doctors as well. And so they dictate the curriculum, and people don't even realize it. They have no idea but that's what it is, and that's why that's why we have such bad results, is because of this industry capture, this corporate capture. So, dogs and cats. I mean, if you look at it, the life expectancy of dogs has dropped in half in the last 40 years. In the 1970s, the average life expectancy of a golden retriever was 17 years. Now it's 9 years, right? And what's taught in vet schools is that, well, this is because of these intensive breeding, puppy mills and things like that. They had those long before the 70s, and golden retriever was a pure breed. It doesn't get more inbred. It's already inbred. It's an inbred breed, right?
Mhm.
And so, it doesn't come from that. If you feed these animals what they're designed to eat, they will live a lot longer and will live a lot longer as well. The nutrition is very simple for every animal, for every species on Earth. You just have to see what they eat in the nature, and and what they've been eating the longest, because that's the immutable law of biology, is that of adaptation. What you've been exposed to the longest is what you're best adapted to. People think it's like, well, you shouldn't cook meat because no carnivores cook meat. Well, humans are carnivores, and we've been cooking meat for about 2 million years, at least 1.6 million years. And that's out in the wild. No one's telling them to do this. They're just doing this all on their own. Okay, so yeah, actually, there are carnivores that eat cooked meat, and we've been adapting to cooked meat for at least 1.6 million years. We've only had the agricultural revolution 8 to 10,000 years. And some populations, like Native Americans, Native Australians, many peoples in Siberia, Mongolia, Africa, etc., they've been carnivores up until last century. And so they've had really no time at all to become adapted to this. So we've had 1.6 million years to adapt to cooked meat. We've only had about 10,000 years in the best scenario, best case circumstance, adapting to these plants, right? Some of these plants are invented in the last few centuries. They've been bred by and hybridized by other things. And then we have artificial food and seed oils and refined sugars and artificial ingredients and things like that that haven't even existed. Um, with sugar, certainly not in that capacity and that to that extent, but seed oils didn't exist, more than a century or so ago. And these artificial ingredients didn't exist previously. Glyphosate didn't exist a century ago, and now it's in everything. It's in the freaking rainwater, and it's being put on all of our crops immediately before harvest, so that's going directly into the food supply. So, oh, well, it breaks down and goes away. We've tested bread and other sorts of foodstuffs. They have thousands of times the amounts of glyphosate that is supposed to be safe and acceptable in food. And just like nothing happens because they are massively wealthy, and they splash the cash around the politicians to make sure that they get to keep doing this absolute poisonous rot. So, when you're, so what you think about is, okay, what if humans been eating the longest? What if humans been eating 50,000 years ago during an ice age? That's what you should be eating, because that's what we're most adapted to. And you get away from that, and you'll have problems. And we see that in all forms of life. When you're trying to figure out what to feed a lion in a zoo, you're not going to somebody at Harvard and saying, oh, can you do a study to figure out and do a survey and ask a whole bunch of lions, what they prefer and all that sort of bullshit. Just look and see what lions eat. What do lions eat? That's what they eat. That's what you feed them. What do gorillas eat? They eat specific leaves. Okay, get those leaves. What about pandas? Get what a panda eats, and so on. It's really not that hard. We've made it so much more complicated. A koala has a smooth cerebrum, so they have a very, very small amount of thinking capacity. Let's put it that way. They're not smart animals. If a freaking koala can figure out what to eat, we should be able to figure out what to eat. We're so sharp, we'll cut ourselves. We have so many people making all these claims and arguments as to what we should eat and what's beneficial to us, that we forgot that we should just be able to do this intuitively and naturally. We've had a lot of people propagandizing against our natural evolved diet, our biologically appropriate diet, which is meat, which we've been eating forever. Since humans have been humans, we've been eating meat, and predominantly meat. And then in the last sort of 50 years, convinced everybody that what everyone naturally wants to eat is actually bad for us and is harming us and killing us, even though it never has caused any of these problems before. And convince us that these things that haven't even existed, like margarine and seed oils, that these things that have never existed are actually our optimal food source. It is impressive as hell that they were able to pull that off, but it was extremely, extremely detrimental to people's health. And it doesn't make any damn sense. Like you will not going to be better and more optimized by eating food that didn't exist 100 years ago. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. You're talking about a medicine or some sort of chemical that can alter and optimize our functionality. So maybe that happens, but this is not that. And as far as just optimal nutrition goes, it's going to be what we've been exposed to the longest, and that's fatty meat, and that's all there is to it.
Do you see a realistic path to counteracting big agriculture, the lobbying they do?
Well, I think you have to. Well, the thing is, they can lobby all they want, but as we currently live in at least a partially free society where we're still allowed to make our own choices. And so people vote with their pocketbook and they vote with their dollar. And if they understand, we educate them and they say like, okay, well, this is all bullshit and this is all profit motive by these companies. And they can make better choices for themselves. And that's what's happening, which is why they're freaking out, which is why there's this outcry against this paid and manufactured outcry against people going on a carnivore diet, because people are getting healthy, they are getting better, and they are going away from these horrible processed foods and junk foods, and which are all plant-based. It's all plant-based junk food, but they make a huge amount of money on it, and they want people back. They want their this is like any good drug dealer. You need to catch them young, get them addicted, and then keep them their whole life. It's all about the return customer. And so that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to addict people and get them just buying this garbage. So we have to do it in grassroots movement, because there is this lobbying effort that's gonna corrupt politicians. We're seeing that now in the confirmation hearings with RFK, who wants to be who's nominated for the head of HHS in America. And he's been an environmental lawyer. He's been suing processed food and drug companies and the big agrochemical sort of companies for his entire career. And he doesn't need to do this. He's retired. He's got kids and grandkids, and he's a Kennedy, so he's loaded. He has no problems in life, and so he doesn't need to do this. He's doing this because it's important, and he's passionate about it. And you have these people really, really going against him. There's all these people that have huge financial conflicts with the food and drug companies. Are getting paid by all these big food and drug companies, and they're saying, oh, we've got to stop this guy, this crazy kook, and blah 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 blah. Yeah, because it's threatening your donors. And so that is really important to sort of get people like that in there that don't have any financial investments or ties, that they actually just care about this issue, and they can't be bought, and so that will help. I think. I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes down to money in politics. When the federal government is not, the American federal government it's unconstitutional for the government to spend any amount of money, a single dollar, that is not for the express good of everyone, of the general welfare, not specific groups or special interests, something like that. That's barn door illegal and unconstitutional. That for 150 years that was followed, and then in the 1930s they were doing all this New Deal garbage and trying to destroy the Constitution and use judicial activism to just say no, the Constitution says we can do this, even though of course they can't. And so now that's in precedent, and so unless that gets overturned, we're going to keep having the problem that we have. But the government being able to spend trillions and trillions of dollars on whatever the hell it wants to, whether or not it actually benefits the American people, um, is and they can spend it on special interests. Now you have lobbyists. So these lobbyists come in and say, "Hey, I'll give you $1 million towards your next campaign if you push this bill that gives us $100 million and whatever." And then they do it, or allow us to do this other thing or whatever. So, and then they do it. So you have to get money out of politics in the long run, but in the short run, getting this, you know, if it doesn't matter what their lobbies are, it doesn't matter what their products are. If people just don't buy that crap, they won't buy it, and they're not gonna succeed. And they're trying to manipulate it. The last administration, for some reason, they sent out a kill order on 100 million chickens in America. So it's all of a sudden that the egg prices have doubled now, and they're just not there. Like, we went to Costco the other day, there were no eggs, just no eggs, right? It's like it's Costco, and that's because they killed 100 million chickens, right? What the hell was that about? And I'm sure there's an excuse and plausible deniability and all that sort of crap. But at the end of the day, they killed 100 million of these birds, and they've been trying to wipe out cattle herds in Ireland. They're talking about wiping out half the herd or more. Denmark as well, America, Australia, saying putting a methane tax that would double the cost to the farmer. Basically, farmers, ranchers in Australia make around 3,500 Aussie dollars per cow. So that's the whole thing. Its whole life cycle. You're taking that through, years of raising it, and they make $3,500 total gross. And they're saying, yeah, we're going to put in a $3,500 methane tax on these cows. And it's just like, that's every single cent that they would make on that cow. Right. So, they're doing everything they can to manipulate the markets and manipulate this, and people are still not buying it. And they're still getting meat regardless. And they're going to ranchers directly and buying direct, which helps the ranchers, which helps us. And so I think that we keep doing that, and we start pressuring our politicians to not make these really damaging policies that are going to destroy the food supply and the food chain and the for meat, and start supporting ranchers and supporting politicians that are actually in there fighting for us to have proper nutrition, and not letting these clowns get away with destroying our food chain in the name of whatever whatever brand design that they have in mind. It's so there's a lot of things that you can do, but just making your own personal choices and just eating this way, that's one of the strongest things. Vote with your pocketbook. And if enough people do that, they'll eventually see that this is not viable for them to keep fighting this. And if they want to make money, they have to do it in a way that we want.
It's tough though. I have friends in medical school, and even there, they're actively pushing, the whatever it is against carnivore. And
I
I
guarantee
believe.
you, I guarantee you, they've never had one class on nutrition. I guarantee that the only thing they got taught the Framingham study about how cholesterol is bad. And I guarantee you that these are all their preconceived notions. They weren't taught this in medical school, but now because they're in medical school, well, I know because I'm in medical school. And I know this because I went to medical school and I saw people have this exact same mindset, that things they never got taught in medical school. It was just their own opinion going into medical school. And now because they're no, that's what it is. And they'll speak in such an authoritative way. Like, oh, well, I'm in medical school, and so, I obviously know this. It's like, you didn't learn it in medical school, though. This is your own preconceived notion. And also, more than half of the things you're going to learn in medical school are dead wrong. And so I wouldn't take that to the bank either. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're all good. For you, what would success look like in lobbying your message?
Well, it's hard to sort of track these things, but my whole idea behind this is just trying to get this information out there so people make their own decision. I don't care if people go carnivore or not. I just don't want them to avoid meat because they're being told it's bad for them, and eat a whole bunch of fruits and vegetables because they're told that they're good for them, because they're not. They simply aren't. If you enjoy them and you want them in your life, and and you're okay with the deleterious effects they have on your body, or maybe they're so subtle that you don't really know or care, fine. But I don't think that people should be misinformed. I think they should be able to make their own decisions. I think if you want to eat junk food and candy, so be it. But, at least have the information,
Yeah.
and that, if you're sick and you're having diabetes and all these sorts of things, as a doctor, it is not good practice to just give people medications that cover up the symptoms of these diseases when you can completely reverse the underlying root cause. If you have somebody who has lead poisoning and oh, well, here's a pill and that will sort of keep your lead levels down and you can keep going on and drinking water from lead pipes. That's a really bad thing to do. The first thing you do is you get rid of the lead pipes, you get rid of the lead exposure, and then maybe you use medicine to sort of get them through and help them recover. But the treatment, the cure, is getting rid of the lead because the lead is causing the harm. And right now we're eating food that causes harm, and we're not getting enough food that benefits us and gives us what we need. And so the solution for that is not a pill. It's changing the way you eat. That's going to address the underlying root cause of these diseases and illnesses. And I truly believe that the vast majority of chronic diseases are a direct cause of eating an inappropriate diet and not getting enough fatty meat and eating too much of plants and things like that that have toxic elements that are harmful to you. And processed foods even worse. But it's all bad. And if people want to, people want to smoke, if they want to drink, I don't care, but don't smoke and drink because doctors are telling you they're really good for you and that's going to help you. People in the Tour de France in the 1940s used to smoke because they thought that would open up their lungs and give them better cardiovascular support and open up so they were smoking cigarettes in the morning as they were getting ready to go because they thought it improved their lung function. That's crazy, but that's what people said. And and that was all advertising by the manufacturers, and you saw this back then. It was like, oh, 9 out of 10 doctors choose Camel cigarettes. It's like, oh my God. So, just I don't want people eating something that's harmful to them just because for the sole reason that they think it's good for them, and avoiding the most healthy and nutritious food that exists on this planet, fatty meat, because they're being told that it's harmful. That's the only thing. And so, I mean, I do this because I feel the best doing it this way. I get the best results. I get the best results with my patients this way. And so that's what I recommend if people want to be optimal. But as long as you're eating more meat, not scared of the meat, not scared of the fat, and just understanding what plants are doing by design and by their nature as they have these toxins, and just adjusting your life accordingly. That's all I really, really care about. And just the fact that people are having this conversation about plant toxins, I consider that a big win. But I think that it's hard to quantify this. You know, I I don't know, where an endpoint is. I just want this education to be out there. I just want this information to be out there and have a lot of information out there so that people know that that they've been lied to, and then they can make any decision that they want. That's what I really want. So hopefully getting this to be accepted mainstream, that meat and fat are not harmful to you, and that plants are not necessarily as good as we've been told. And yeah, so we'll see. We still have a long way to go, but I think someone said that when you've made it in this sort of thing if it shows up as like an option on an airplane. There's like vegetarian options, vegan options on an airplane, and now you can find keto options. Like, oh, okay. So as soon as you can see a carnivore option on an airplane menu, probably that's when you consider this a win.
I love it. That's good. I'm just curious, like in 100 years, like what our core beliefs will be, what our primary beliefs will be, because
It's very interesting. Yeah.
yeah, like you're saying,
Yeah.
it's how we looked at stuff 50 years ago. It's delusional. Probably the
Yeah.
same way right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There were books coming out every 5-10 years talking about how humans are optimally designed to eat meat. And this is from doctors, from researchers saying, hey, no, this is what we need to do. We're getting this increase in diseases. There's a book called strong medicine. And that was written by a doctor who showed this same thing. You know, we should just be eating meat, you know, and that you can basically cure all of these chronic diseases by just going back and just eating meat. The Stone Age diet was another one in 1975, and that's the same thing. You say, like, look, humans are carnivores. Here's the evidence for that. Just eat meat, you get rid of all these chronic diseases. That was written by a gastroenterologist who basically argued that if you just ate meat, you didn't need his profession, his specialty of gastroenterology. These problems just go away. And there are more and more and more. And so it's just been in the last 40, 50 years that that this information has been corrupted, and to the extent that it has. So, I hope that this isn't like that we're not looking back on, these sorts of interviews and books, I'm writing a book, and maybe that makes an impact now. Maybe 70 years from now, it's looking very different. And then someone rediscovers my book going, oh my goodness, they knew this all the way back then. Like, what's going on, like we're doing for these other books. I hope that's not it. I hope that this becomes mainstream. I hope that with the internet and with the reach of information that's available now, that this gets into the public domain and stays there. Now, you can have mass propaganda campaigns that, book burning, and Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany and communist China and things like that, and they destroy information that is not convenient to the communist and fascist empires and socialist empires. But and so you can do that and keep people ignorant. If you keep people ignorant, you keep them under control. That's a saying. It's thousands of years old. And so you could undo this, but I'm hoping that the cat's out of the bag now. And because it does work, and people are seeing this massive improvements in their health. And people can say, like, oh, well, there's this one thing and possible problem and blah, blah, blah. People say, look, that's complete and utter bullshit. I've been doing this and I've lost, 150 pounds. My diabetes reversed. My multiple sclerosis resolved on MRI. I'm not wheelchair bound anymore. I don't have gout. I don't have lupus. My grandmother's MoCA score started improving, and she didn't have to be in a nursing home for Alzheimer's anymore. I mean, you cannot argue with results. I mean, you can. People can argue with anything, but you can only deny them for so long. I mean, this is just what's happening, and people are not dumb. You can think that they're dumb, but that's going to bite you in the ass, and you can try to keep them ignorant. But once that information gets out and they decide to use that, it's over. And so when they use that and say, like, well, you've been telling me a lot of things that didn't turn out to be true, and this actually makes sense, maybe I'll try it, and it works, and then all the people around them, it works exactly the same way, and then it works the same. People say that, oh, there's no evidence for this, and it's so crap. If it were such a bad idea, then why does it work exactly the same way for every single person every single time they try it? They reverse diabetes, they reverse autoimmunity, they improve their body composition, they increase lean body mass, they reduce adipose tissue, they improve their health in objective ways that you can measure with blood tests, with other sorts of means, scans, etc., and with their symptoms. So these are things that are improving, and you can say that they won't all you want, but the evidence is totally against them. And when people actually apply this to their life, and their lives get better in all of these different objective ways every single time in the same way, you're really just in denial at that point, or you're just one of these shills that are trying to push this propaganda, by these multi-trillion-dollar companies, food and drug companies. But people are seeing this for themselves. It actually works. And so just through word of mouth, this is spreading like wildfire because it actually does work. Right. And so more and more information is coming out on it. And hopefully this stays in our collective memory long enough so that they can't, bury it with propaganda. That's my hope. So hopefully in 100 years, we are a hell of a lot healthier. We live longer with much longer health span, not just a lifespan, but a health span, and are taller, probably going to be like good 6 inches taller bigger brains, smarter, better developed children, better health, better mental health, all these sorts of things. So that's what I'm hoping. And at the very least, my kids and grandkids are going to be that way. So, you know, if you guys don't want that for your kids, then you're going to have to compete against mine, and they're gonna kick your ass. So, pick your lane.
Love it. That's dope, man. How did you do this back in the day? Sort of like a budget version of this. No.
Oh, there's plenty of cheap options. I mean, if you think about it, meat, even steak, costs less per pound than spinach and lettuce does,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, you can, and 1 pound of ribeye steak is going to give a perfect nutrition, where a pound of spinach is just going to, give you, depression. You're like, oh, I got to eat this. Jesus Christ, like you don't want to eat that crap. And so it's actually much more affordable than people think. It's, if you look at it per pound, per kilo, it is actually cheaper than plants, most plants. And but there are cheaper versions. I mean, chicken is very inexpensive, and the legs and thighs are the most inexpensive part, because those have the fat, and people say, "Ooh, fat's bad. Stay away from it." Well, good. That actually serves us very well, because you want the fat. And so getting the legs and the thighs with the skin on, those are the cheapest part. And they're also the best and most nutritious. Eggs used to be inexpensive. Now they're getting it to be a lot more expensive. Get some chickens yourself, and raise some eggs. Great, great quality eggs if they're just out foraging the yard, if you are able to do that. But I've known people in suburbs in California who had their own chickens just in their backyard, not like a huge backyard. They just roamed
Mm-hmm.
around, and they had fresh eggs every day. And so that's, those are options as well. But also, your pork is extremely inexpensive. It's much less expensive than beef or lamb. You can get cheaper cuts. Brisket is very good cut of beef. It has the exact same nutrients as the rest of the cow, and a very good fat content. And it's cheap. It's very cheap. As far as these, it's, twice as expensive, 3 times as expensive as it was, 5 or 6 years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
it's still a hell of a lot cheaper than anything else. And you can actually cut brisket against the grain into steaks and actually eat it that way. I have friends that do that. It's very, very cheap. Or just, slow cook a brisket. Chuck steak is very good. Ground beef is extremely cheap. Um, and lamb shoulder chops are very cheap as well. And they're like my favorite cut as well. They have really good fat. That's sort of equivalent of like a chuck sort of blade steak in a cow. They taste great. My mouth's like literally watering right now. And and there's just, a lot of these cheap cuts. But just remember that you're eating a lot less as a result. Now you're getting as much calories and more nutrition, but you don't have to eat as much, because it's very nutritionally dense. When you're eating plants, you have to eat a lot of it, because it's very nutritionally poor. And it's worse quality. And you can't really put a price on health, but you can just do ground beef. Ground beef
Yeah.
is fine. Ground lamb, ground pork, and chicken. Those sorts of things. Chicken and pork. Those are very cheap cuts. And if that's all you can afford, that's all you can afford, and that's fine. Just eat the meat that you enjoy, that makes you feel the best, and that you can afford and have access to, and just make sure you get enough fat. And that's pretty much it. Add some grass-fed butter if your things are too lean. Things like that. There's a lot of tricks, and you're not buying all the Starbucks and lattes and frappuccinos and all these other sorts of nonsense that I I mean, it's stupid expensive now, but like, ribeye is like $15 a pound now, right? So even if you're
Mm-hmm.
going for the, the Rolls Royce of steaks, and going for that, $15 a pound, and I eat 2 pounds a day, so that's $30 a day, like really eating really well. And you could do, ground beef is less than $10 a pound, and I can eat, for $10 I can eat 2 pounds of really high quality ground beef, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fattier is cheaper actually. And so, and that's 2 cups of coffee at Starbucks, you
Yeah.
know, that's a bag of chips, I mean, like it's, it's certainly, it's like, $10 you could get 6 ounces of lettuce or spinach. You know what I mean? And I'm talking 2 pounds of perfect nutrition. So it actually ends up being a lot cheaper. A lot of people, especially when they know what to buy, and getting things that aren't like super expensive cuts, they end up saving a lot of money on what they're eating. And a lot of people, if you budget that out and you actually look at what you're spending on food, they actually find that they're spending a lot less on food. Now you can buy things and meat can get as expensive as you want it to. You can go to Whole Foods and buy the filet mignon and just the leanest and everything. Like, yeah, you could just completely destroy your bank account and budget by doing that, but you don't have to. I mean, just make sensible purchases, and you're not buying all the other auxiliary things like the snacks and the coffees and things like that. You end up saving money for sure, and you're not getting sick, and that's the main thing. You're coming off medications and improving your health, and that's going to not only save you money, but it's not something you can really put a price on. Good health is everything. Everyone says that everyone's got 1,000 problems until they get sick, and then they have one problem, and that's it. So everything else you can figure out.
Thanks for listening to the Quinn Podcast. If you enjoyed it, you can go to quinnpodcast.com to check out all of the previous episodes. quinnpodcast.com.